Hey everyone, this is Chris with ProductionCrate.com. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to do the avatar effect I did for the Raka Raka video. If you haven't seen the video, go check it out. It is super cool. I'll leave a link to it in the description. This was probably the most fun project I've ever worked on. I really enjoy working on videos that have a lot of practical effects and stunt work because it just makes the VFX work look that much cooler. And the Raka guys always do that. They're huge stunt guys and huge practical effects guys. So if you don't know their channel, go check it out. Make sure to subscribe. For this tutorial, I want to start with the glowing arrow effect, and then I'll circle back and I'll do the glowing eyes. So here I am in After Effects, got my composition all set up, imported my footage. The shot is only about a second long, but we don't need longer than that. So in order to get the arrow to glow, I need a good way to separate it. I don't want to go through and mask it because I am lazy and that would take way too long. But when I look at this shot, I do notice that there is a lot of blue in the arrow. There's a bit of blue in the scene as well, but not too much. So I think I can exaggerate that difference if I just saturate the shot a bit. So I'll drop a hue and saturation effect on it, and let's just crank this up. Looks like around 80 looks pretty good. And then the next thing I want to do is add a leave color effect. The color I want to leave is this blue in the arrow. And if I go ahead and just increase this amount to decolor percentage, you'll start to see that the scene loses color, but the blue in the arrow sticks around. Now that worked pretty well. We are getting this like little weird clipping issue at the top of the arrow here. So if I come down to tolerance, I could just mess with this percentage a bit. Looks like if I just bring that up to around 30, maybe a little higher. Yeah. Right around 33, we're preserving the blue in the arrow and we're still removing most of it from the scene. There's a little blue left over, but that's not going to be an issue. The next thing I want to do is get rid of all this black and white and just leave the blue. I'm going to add an extract effect. The channel I want to select is the blue channel, and I'll just increase this black point until our scene starts to disappear. You can kind of see how that's working. At the end of the shot, you can see we're keeping in a lot of the sky. I'm just going to keyframe this black point and crank it up a bit higher. And then I'll hit U so I can see that keyframe. I'll just move it over here. And right when I start to see this clipping issue down here at the bottom of the arrow, I'll just bring this black point in a bit. That way we're not really clipping the blue at all. Alright, so the next step is just getting rid of this extra blue leftover junk in the scene. So I'm just going to go through and do a quick garbage mat. I'm going to hit G for my pen tool. I'm going to just go to the last frame and animate backwards. I'm going to hit M and then I'm going to hit the stopwatch, and that way every time I move the mask I'm creating a new keyframe, and I'm just going to go backwards every 2 or 3 frames. Make sure my arrow stays within the mask, but I'm also cutting out all that extra blue leftover bits. Alright, so I finished the garbage mat. Let's just play it back and see what we got. Works pretty well. Looks like there's still a little clipping and some hard edges, but that's not really a problem right now. So I'm going to duplicate my footage, select this bomb layer. I'm just going to delete all those effects. Let's delete that mask as well. So now we can see this blue arrow on top. We kind of get the idea of how it's going to work. Just going to pre-compose that arrow footage, move all attributes into the new composition, and I will name it arrow. Down here in my blending mode, I'm going to change that to add. And then over in my effects and presets, I'm going to type in camera lens blur. The reason I'm using a blur is just because we're seeing some of these hard edges here and there's some clipping inside the arrow. So if I turn the blur back on, you can see it resolves that pretty quickly. I'm going to bring up the blur just a little bit more. And that's also giving us a nice little glow effect. So that's the effect for getting the arrow to glow, but now I want the arrow to reveal. And I want it to look cool, organic, like the energy's actually powering up inside his head. The way I did that for the video was using a fractal layer. So I'm just going to create a new solid. I'll call it fractal. I'm going to add a fractal noise to the layer. Oops. Fractal noise. And I just want to increase the scale a little bit. You can bring up the complexity. Then on the first frame, I'm going to hit the stopwatch for evolution. Go to the last frame. Type in 1. Let's just play that back. The speed looks pretty good, maybe just a touch too fast. So instead of 1, maybe I'll bring this down around 307. A random number, but it looks pretty good to me. Now, so we can see what the effect is doing, I'm going to select my arrow and change this track matte to Luma matte. So now we can kind of see how the fractal noise is revealing the energy in his head. So selecting my fractal noise layer again, I'm going to stopwatch the brightness on the first frame. Let's just bring this down until the energy is entirely invisible. And then I'll just move forward in my timeline till I think it's a good point for the energy to be fully powered up. Let's say right around there. And I'll bring this brightness back up just until the point that the arrow is fully glowing. So that looks alright, but the issue that I'm seeing is the fractal noise is not moving with his head, so it looks disjointed. So really quickly, I'm going to just hit Y for my pan behind tool. I'm going to drag my arrow point to the tip of the arrow. I'm going to select my fractal solid. I'm going to hit P for position and hit that stopwatch. And I wasn't on the first frame, so I will just toggle back to the first frame. I'm going to hit V for my selection tool, and I'm just going to move that anchor point to the tip of the arrow. I'm going to just move forward one frame at a time and make sure that it stays roughly in that same spot. And this is just a way to avoid trying to track it. The scene is so short, tracking it would be pretty unnecessary. At this point, I don't need to track any further because the fractal noise is fully revealing the glowing arrow, so I can just stop right there. And let's just play it out so we can see what it looks like. So now the fractal noise moves with the head. It looks a bit more realistic, but one thing I am noticing is that the fractal noise layer is flat while his head is round. So the way I addressed this in the short was I just added a bulge effect, and I just add that to the fractal layer. And then I just scaled up this bulge till it was roughly the size of his head. All set up and good to go. If you do want to mess with the fractal noise layer a little bit, you can get some other really cool looks. So let's change the fractal type from basic to dynamic twist. That'll give us more of a kind of smoky, liquidy look, which is pretty cool. We can also enable the motion blur for the fractal noise layer, as well as for the entire comp. And maybe let's add a fast blur. Just make that something like 2, just so it's not so sharp. And let's mess with the animation speed a little bit. Drag the brightness out so it takes a little longer for the energy to charge up. And maybe I increase the evolution speed a little bit. Let's just see how that looks. Great, I'm actually really liking this effect. There's a cool little swirl thing that's happening there that really gives it that energy charging up feel, kind of like a stormy hurricane looking thing. So the next thing I want to do is work on the glowing eyes. One thing I noticed with this shot is there is a lot of motion blur. The camera must have been moving around a significant amount, as well as the subject, so that makes it pretty tricky to track. So what I want to do is I'm just going to duplicate my base footage. I'll call this second to bottom one deblurred. And I'll go to my effects and presets panel and let's type in deblur. And there we can find the camera shake deblur effect. I'll just drag that on top. Now this effect, it's going to slow your machine down, but it is a pretty awesome effect. So I know my blur duration works best at around 9 frames. I'm also going to change my deblur method from standard to high quality, increase my strength all the way up to 200, change my shake sensitivity from 50 to 100, and those are my settings. Now this is really going to slow down my machine. If you're having a similar issue, you can always just export it and then work off of the export. So there I go, I have my deblurred footage. I'll go ahead and turn off the effect so you can see it with the blur, and then you can see how effective the deblur actually is. Alright, so next I'm going to add a levels effect. I'm going to add that below the camera shake deblur. The reason I'm using this levels effect is just to try and create a little extra contrast in the scene. Contrast definitely helps when it comes to tracking. Something like that should work pretty nicely. Then I'm just going to pre-compose this entire thing and make sure all my attributions are in the new composition. I'll navigate to the very last frame. I'm going to just zoom in on this eye and hit G to bring up my pen tool. Now I want to stay pretty close to the edges, but I don't have to be perfect. I will be feathering and adding glows later. Great, so next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to hit M to bring up my mask. I'll right click this mask and select the track mask. And let me zoom out so I can keep an eye on everything. And then I'm just going to analyze backwards. Great, so my mask tracking looks like it is done. It obviously has trouble tracking when he looks down, so I'm just going to clip that. I may want to include this frame, so I'm just going to clip it right there. And let's just scroll through. Yeah, it looks like the mask actually tracked on close enough that I don't need to make any changes to this. So I'm just going to zoom in and do the same thing with this eye. So I'm going to right click this mask, select the track mask, and let's zoom back out so I can see everything. Those horrible puns today. And then I'm just going to analyze backwards. Great, and it looked like it did a pretty good job. Right on this one frame, it looks like the mask really came off, but I'm just going to select the mask layer itself. And let's drag it down. I can also double click it and rotate it a little bit. Be right around there. And I'll do that for this pink mask as well. Let's drag that down and maybe rotate it a little bit as well. Something like that. And then I decided that I might as well just keep this frame in, so I'll move these masks down, maybe shrink it. So something like that'll work fine, doesn't need to be perfect. So let's just scroll through and make sure that the tracking is pretty good. Man, that looks super creepy. That looks like some weird zombie movie. So I'm gonna just make his eyes red really quickly to see what that would look like. Let's drop a fill effect on there. Let's maybe make it more of a blood red look. Something like that. And then I'm gonna change the blending mode to, let's try overlay. Feather that out. See if we got a cool zombie eyeball thing going on. Like a vampire. Anyway, that was a waste of time. Let's change the fill effect to, let's try like a light blue. Something like that's cool. I can change the blending mode from overlay to add. And let's play it back. That looks pretty good. We're missing some motion blur, so I'm just going to enable the motion blur for this entire layer. And it looks like with the motion blur, there looks to be too much of a disconnect. Between where the masks tracked and where the eyes are. So what I'm going to do is hit M to bring up my masks, and since they're already keyframed, I can just move them for each frame pretty quickly. I'll select both masks, and I'm just going to move them up until it looks like they're covering up the eye nicely, and I'm keeping motion blur on since that seems to be the issue. Cool, let's try that. Great, that looks pretty good. So the next thing I want to do is, let's probably bring down the feathering a little bit. Let's maybe make that 4 instead of 12. For this yellow mask, I think I want to just expand it out a little bit. So I'll go down to my mask expansion. Let's maybe increase that. Try 2. Looks like it's covering up the eye a little bit better. Let's try 1 for now. I'm going to right click it, pre-compose, move all attributes into the new composition, and I'll just call this composition glowing eyes. Now I lose the blending mode when I did that. One way you can bring the blending mode back if it's within a pre-comp is by hitting this collapse layers checkmark here, and it'll actually bring in the blending mode that you have within the pre-comp. So if I turn it off, you can see the blending mode isn't there. Since I do most likely want to use different blending modes, I'm just going to change the blending mode here, and let's make it, we'll try add for now. I'll duplicate that glowing eyes. Now let's add the glow effect. I'll increase the threshold until I start to see that blue. Try and get the blue to match the arrow pretty well, so it's like a lighter blue. And let's increase the radius. Something like that. You can even duplicate the glow and see how that looks. And we can mess with blending mode. So right now it's add, maybe we try lighten or linear dodge. That looks pretty cool. We'll leave it there for now. Cool, so this eye is looking a little wobbly right now. I could go through and try and clean the masks up. I'm not going to because this is a tutorial. It does not need to be perfect. You guys get the idea. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is duplicate this glowing eyes pre-comp one more time. I am going to be using a third-party plugin. It's called, oh, that looks pretty cool. I like doubling that up one more time. Let's see how that looks. Ooh, I'm liking it more now. Super glowy eyes. Alright, cool. So I'll duplicate it one more time. I think that's too glowy at this point. I'll delete the glow effects off of this pre-comp. I'll just turn off the blending mode for now. And let's find an effect called Trapcode Shine. This is a third-party plugin, but it is awesome. So if you have the cash lying around, I would go buy a Production Crate Pro membership first, and then I would definitely go and check out Trapcode. The Trapcode suite is awesome. I use it all the time. They're not paying me to say that. They're just freaking awesome. Cool, so I'll add the Trapcode Shine effect. And right now it looks horrible, so what I want to do is change the colorize from 3-color gradient to none, so it will use the original colors. I can change the transfer mode to add. I'm just going to leave it for none right now because I will change it later on the layer itself. Alright, now I'm going to mess with the ray length a little bit, maybe increase the boost light. And we can figure out where we want this source point to be. So I I think it looks pretty cool if it's slightly higher up. And I think I want this shine to be at its brightest as he's lifting his head. So right around here, it's kind of shining directly into the camera. I'm also going to go ahead and just hit the stopwatch for my source point. And let's just navigate forward through the timeline. Now this is being really laggy. I'm going to just double check and see if I left my deblur effect on. I did, so that was slowing down my entire system. So here I am all the way in my earliest pre-comp with my camera shake, deblur, and levels, and I'm just going to disable both of those. We no longer need it. Great, so now I'm able to navigate around a lot faster in this. I'm going to hit U so I can see my source point keyframe. I'm going to just raise that up a little bit. And I want to keep that source point maybe right around where the tip of that arrow is. So I'm just moving around, seeing when the source point gets really off of its mark and moving it back on it. Again, I'm just skipping around in the timeline. Alright, I also want the shine to be at its strongest when he lifts his head. So let me go back to the first frame, we can see it. This frame, and I will hit the boost light and ray length stopwatches. And let's just really increase that light for now, as well as the ray length. Right around there is pretty cool. I'll navigate forward, maybe around here, and I will just drop this ray length down to, let's try 4. And the boost light down to maybe 1. Cool. I'm actually not loving this blue around his eyes so much anymore, so for one of these glowing eye pre-comps, I'm just going to change the blending mode. Let's try add, and I'll drop the opacity down. Maybe around there looks pretty good. Now let's do a RAM preview of all the effects all together. Cool, so that's the final effect with the glowing eyes and glowing arrow. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something. I think for me, I'm going to just add a little extra something. I'll add a smoke screen effect. It's not going to be motion tracked at all because I didn't motion track anything. I'm going to just reverse this. Yeah, so that's it. That is the avatar state effect. It's also the effect that you can do for zombies from Call of Duty. Remember those guys? That was like my favorite part of the game. So we're going to be doing a couple other tutorials for the effects that we created for the Raqqa video, as well as doing a VFX breakdown, so make sure to go and subscribe to our channel. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time.